Good morning. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Bill Baker, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this webinar today that is sponsored by the Tennessee Association of Independent Schools. This is part of the Crisis Coach webinar series that is presented once a month, and today we're talking about the year in review. Our presenter today is Jim Satterfield, the President and Chief Operating Officer of Firestorm. We'd also like to invite you to become our friend on Facebook and on Twitter. On Twitter, we're known as Firestorm Soul. At Facebook, we're known as Firestorm Solutions. There is actually a hashtag. That hashtag is Crisis Coach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value and empowers you to manage risk and crises. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. We'd like to remind you that the presentation today is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion, and this work product should be discussed in conjunction with advice from your organization's personal counsel. In addition, this is not to be interpreted as legal advice or legal opinion. We're pleased to have Rich Martin with us today from the Tennessee Association of Independent Schools, who's the host and sponsor of this series that is presented monthly. Rich, over to you, please.
Thanks, Bill, and welcome everyone to this this workshop. As the title indicates, it's the year in review, so I think Jim is going to take us through some highlights or lowlights of the year in terms of crisis and management situations. I look forward to seeing that. We also want to encourage you all to take advantage of TAIS programming in the coming semester. All our programs for this year have been completed successfully. One's been moved to next semester, so you'll have to look for that on our website. But we're looking forward to another great year and to another great webinar with Firestorm. So back to you, Bill.
Well, and I'll jump in, Rich. It's always great to have you live on our calls and share. I know many of the times you're out helping schools and aren't able to be with us. So as we're talking through this, if you've got comments, please feel free to share that. One of the things that we were discussing, by the way, before the webinar today, Rich and I were talking about the role of boards within our schools and how they support or maybe even distract in a crisis from the outcome. So we'll think about that in our conversations today, and I think you'll hear more about it in coming events as we discuss through that. There's a significant advantage to being a member of the Tennessee Association of Independent Schools, the networking, the sharing of events, the big meeting that was just held in Chattanooga last month. It was a great opportunity to network and see what's going on and what's happening. So thanks again for being with us today, and I look forward to sharing some thoughts about what we're seeing. If you need some assistance and access to assets, you can go on the Firestorm website. The button under Resources could give you access to the briefs from previous webinars or get through to the actual recordings of those webinars or other services. It's about trying to help you make those decisions before, during, or after a crisis. And you'll learn a great deal about who we are and what we do at that particular site. Rich stated that we're looking at 2016 in review. It's hard to believe that another year has come and gone, and we're in that wind-down period, although our phone is ringing still with people trying to deal with matters that are occurring to them in their schools and trying to manage through those particular situations. As we think about them,
Jim, can you hear me? You've dropped.
And I should be back. I apologize for that drop-off, and thank you for hanging in with us as we went through it. So let's look at this year. Anytime you have an election year, I think you have a different set of factors going. By the way, this is a good example of what can happen in a live broadcast as we do these events each month. We've certainly seen a great many situations that gave us pause through the year. The terrorist bombings in and around New York and New Jersey earlier in the year, the Brussels terrorist attack, the earthquakes in Italy. We've had plenty of cyber breaches to focus on. We've seen violence in our schools. Just last week we had an attack at Ohio State University. We had the shooting earlier this year in South Carolina at a school. It's unfortunate that we live in a world where there are events that will impact our students and our ability to operate every single day. Violence seems to be a common theme, and we're going to be talking some about behaviors of concern and what we should put into place around identifying those today a little bit. But whether it was terrorism or an active shooter or a student who is facing bullying or cyberbullying or sexting or contemplating suicide, these are the types of things that we're going to find as increasing challenges in looking in 2017. We see civil unrest across the country about a great many different situations. We see police officers being shot. We see arrests where individuals are shot in the process, and everyone is forced to react to those events. And a theme today from looking at the year in review is it's going to be about the header on this particular slide, planning for the unplanned. How do we plan for this wide range of events? How do we get ready for each one of those particular activities that are here? So we need to be set, and we need to have that in place to be able to deal in each one of those particular areas. So we start with building a strong foundation. You've got to have a plan within your school of how do we make these types of decisions? How do we make them in a live crisis environment? The picture you see there is where the foundation for the new World Trade Center was while it was being built, and it's now up and open, as you're aware, but you have to come in and have a foundation. And the foundation in building in this area is that we need to make sure that we have a plan, that everyone has been trained on it, and we have tested in making those decisions. So let's continue this theme about planning for the unplanned. There are four things that can happen to us in a disaster or crisis. First, something can happen in our school and we would lose a building, or our campus could be impacted in a particular way. So it's a loss of facility is one of the big impacts that we could have. The second is something could happen to our people. If we were talking about a business, we'd be using that term workforce up there, but it's our students and our teachers. Something could affect them on a personal basis. The third is that it could be an information security or an information technology event. And then finally, it could be a brand or reputation one, or a combination of all of those. The hardest phone call you're going to ever have to make is that phone call to a parent and say, your child is not coming home today from school. Those types of things are certainly going to be significant. So we want to cause you now to stop and think about, well, if we lost a building, what would we do? What would we say? If we had a student who was injured or died, if we had a field trip where there was an accident, what would we do? What would we say? If somehow our system is hacked, if there's the information that we have about our students taken, or the financial information from their parents, what would we do in that situation? If our systems are down and we can't operate and access, how would we handle it? And then finally, we don't want to become known as the school where X happened. So as we think about those elements, planning for them, regardless of what the cause was, we know something could happen to a building. It could be a tornado, it could be a fire, Some of our schools are located in areas where it could be even a flood. What would we deal? To think that we would go through our career, in the sad statement that I'm about to make, that somewhere in the course of that career in your school, that you wouldn't have a student who was injured, or that you wouldn't have a student who died, whether it was a suicide or an accident or a shooter or whatever the event. So let's plan for those things now. So regardless of what the cause of the event was, the decisions follow a common pattern as we look through each of those areas. So, and it needs to be focused on what you're going to do to deal with it. And the world has changed. Firestorm's been around now for over 11 years, and in that period of time, we've seen that now there are open source intelligence sources to be able to learn what's going on within the area. So I'll say this a couple of times today. For every risk or threat or vulnerability, you need to have a way to monitor to see if that's starting to occur so that you can intervene in that process to mitigate, or in many cases even prevent, the impacts from occurring. So having that structure in place, and the plan needs to be structured to tell you what to do and what to say. Those are the two things that are common in any crisis area. You're going to have to do something and you're going to have to say something. Planning that out in advance will certainly improve the outcomes. It's significantly easier to edit than it is to create. So we want to plan that out in advance and to think about what our strategies are and what our communications are, regardless of what the ultimate cause was from it. Now, making sure your plan tells you how to do something instead of just what to do. We were working with a group that had a problem, and their plan said, notify everybody at home. That's great. That was a what, notify everyone at home, but they didn't have a way to do it. They didn't have all the home phone numbers. They didn't have a notification system in place. They didn't know how to get that message out, and therefore the message didn't go, and that will make a difference in it. And we're going to talk about the types of communications in a few minutes, but let's see what happens if there is a poor response into what goes on. What makes a poor response? Well, in many cases, we become overconfident. We think that we're smarter than other people. We think that we can handle anything on the fly and just figure out a solution, and you're going to have a bad outcome. Now, you may not have followed the story that came out right after the election, where someone made the posting here, Pamela Taylor, who was a contractor here in an organization, and made that posting that you see on the screen. As you can imagine, that created a significant backlash and attack. And it became not only involved against her, but the organization and everyone associated with it, and there were individuals within the organization that started trying to come to her defense, and you see some of the responses that were given to them. Hey, my comment was not intended to be racist. I was referring to the day being made for change in the White House. I'm sorry if there's any harm. Again, I want to apologize. This, before it gets out of hand. That she was reprimanded, and she now then became upset, considering filing a lawsuit. The whole thing spun out of control. This was a result of a communications that was not thought out in advance, and as a result of that, it created a problem. So when we think about what the characteristics are in a poor response, is that there are not controls in place. Actions are said before somebody signs off on them. The resources are not identified in advance that can help us with what we're going to say and how we say it and what the right medium is. And there's not an intelligence network that's monitoring what's the reaction to what we're saying, so that if we need to adjust our messaging, that we in fact can do that. And in many cases, we find that boards will interfere in the decision process. Many times a board will come forward and say, hey, we got to get in front of this. We got to frame this message. Or you've got to control what's going on, control the discussion around it. And we're in a different world today, and we're going to talk more specifically about that as this continues to unfold. If you look at the headline that's there, 5 5 school board seats on the line as Prince George's reels from abuse scandals. Prince George County had a series of sexual abuse events, and there was confusion apparently between the school administration, the school itself, the county leadership, the board. All these angles were coming in place because, quite frankly, there is no excuse. There is no an explanation for sexual abuse and molestation within a school environment. So as we think about that, we all need to speak with one voice in one direction. Now, in a crisis, things come as a surprise, and this was one done in extremely poor taste. This was a clip, if you actually clicked on that picture where it came up on YouTube, it was a video in place, and it was done to take advantage of 9/11 on the anniversary day to try to sell mattresses. And you're going, well, wait a minute, why would anybody even think that would be a possibility? And the answer was nobody thought. And the video was out, and there was such a public outcry that the owner of the mattress company, Miracle Mattress, felt compelled to put out the statement here. He goes, hey, I didn't know about it. It's not, I didn't mean it, blah, 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 blah. But here's an example of an organization that just documented they weren't in control of what their own people were doing in addition to those elements. If someone's coming running into your office at school with a surprise, it's not, hey, there's good news here. Hey, there's a problem. That's what that means. Something has occurred. You're going to need to respond to it. Now, if we've had a chance to meet face-to-face, or you've attended some of these webinars, you've heard me give the phrase, the last time a surprise was good, I was 5 years old, and it was my birthday. If we're getting surprised at school, there's a problem, and we need to have a better way to deal with it in that environment. That's an important aspect for us to have in place to handle it. So something like this comes up. What do we need to do? What do we need to say? So the first 24 hours are crucial in a crisis, and in fact, Firestorm, working with the Tennessee Association of Independent Schools, has a program called Crisis Stop. If you find a crisis in your school, you can call us 24/7, and we're going to get on the phone with you to help make those decisions within it. That's our Crisis Stop program. The acronym STOP stands for Stabilize the situation, help you understand it. T, trigger the response and what resources that you need to have in place. Opine on what the consequences are. And finally, P stands to prevent you from making some of the common mistakes that organizations and schools make in a crisis. So as you look at it, you're going to be under immediate pressure to communicate. That board member might call and say, we need to get out in front of it. We have a program that's Y times 5, and what that stands for is that when someone, whoever it is in your school, says we need to communicate, you need to slow it down and say, why? And they'll give you an answer. Then you ask the second why, and they'll try to explain why that's important. Then you ask a third why. If you can go through asking them why 5 times and the answers are good, then you definitely should communicate. We find that in this process that it generally breaks down, and that asking the why proves to you that you don't need to make a communications, particularly early on. Now, we're going to talk about the types of communications in a few minutes. When we talk about it, and we'll give you some basic messages to go forward with in a crisis, recognizing almost everything you learn initially in this crisis will be wrong. You're going to be forced to make decisions on wrong or incomplete information. So if you said, well, we locked the door, you'll find out you didn't. Well, we put a notice out, you'll find out, no, it didn't go out. There are problems in each of these areas as you think about it. So the first communications need to be very general, and then we'll talk about each one of those as more knowledge starts to unfold, and the various communications types in just a few minutes. If you can try this process, Y times 5, That's going to help you on that tightrope that you're going to be walking in the middle of a crisis. So when do we communicate? Something's occurred. Well, initially the communications are going to be around the area of coordination. You know, what do we need to do? Evacuate, shelter in place, lockdown, lockout. So they're generally broad and they're not tactically specific because you want to be very careful, because what you think you know, you in fact don't know, and the biggest exposure is all of the things that you don't know that you don't know. Now, I've never met a police chief or fire chief who didn't love the media and wanted to talk. If there's been an event where you've had injuries or loss of life, the initial communications can go out from the authorities. That police chief would love to talk about the investigation and what they're doing at that point in time. Let them. You don't want to be involved in that because they're talking about the past. They're talking about the problem. You want to be talking about the future. Well, you see on the screen are the individuals again from Prince George's. And if you look at just the facial expressions of everyone there, you can tell that this conversation is not going as well as they had planned. And talking about sexual abuse is certainly not the position that any school, public or private or independent, want to be in those areas. So let's zero in on these communications for a minute. Well, there are 3 C's in a crisis, 3 C's of crisis communication. And the first is coordination. That's the life safety things. Do we evacuate? Do we shelter in place? Do we lock down, lock out? Those are generally the initial communications. They go out, and they're more than likely internally focused to your students, to your teachers. By the way, if you send a message out to your parents, don't come to school, we're in lockdown, they're going to read that message and say, how do I get there and how quickly can I get there? The second types of communications are about the crisis itself, those things that affect the brand and reputation of your school. And the third type of communications in the crisis becomes around compliance. If you had a cyber breach, you're going to have to notify that their personally identifiable information or their protected health information needs to, that they need their steps they need to take. Or if you're aware that there's a child at risk, whether at school or at home, you're a mandated reporter, and you'll have to give those messages out. Now, the picture you see here is from Tennessee in your state, and the fires that just occurred a little over a week ago. As you think about that, one of the things that we're hearing now is apparently the message to evacuate didn't go out. Now, there were over a dozen people died, and there were hundreds of homes destroyed, and the devastation of that. If there's an event going on, the first thing you need to do is to get the coordination out of what you want people to do. We had another test just recently at Ohio State University where there was an attack from a homegrown terrorist there. Well, and communications need to go out immediately on what you're looking to do. And here are the communications that we saw going out there, and the alert that was coming out: shelter in place in the North Campus, avoid the area of college. Those locations would mean things to the students and the faculty at the school. You'll see last active shooter on campus, run, hide, fight. It's in Watts Hall, 19th and College, and that's the location of it. So if you were in some other location on that campus, you would know not to be in this area. If you were in that location, you would immediately be aware that you were doing. These communications become effective in helping to understand. So that first level of communications is around those elements. So the second then starts to shift into the brand and reputation, the crisis communications itself, and it comes after the event is over. Here the President Drake is talking about hashtag Buckeye Strong, today we move forward, unified, secure. Those types of messages come to support what you're doing, and they're generally focused more externally. Now, clearly, he was speaking to the current students, but in this, he was also speaking to the alumni of the school. The last would wait until all the facts are known. As you think about those, in this case, I probably wouldn't have done a press conference if I was at Ohio State. I would have let the authorities talk about it, and we would have continued to move on. As you look at it, there will be plenty of time for those mandatory reports to come out at a later date. So tell me, what can we say? Well, since the facts are unclear, you want to keep your comments very focused to where we're going. First, that event isn't going to define your school. If you had a shooting that occurred, you had an accident, you had a death, or you had some type of a horrific event that occurred, that's not what your school's about. If I went on the home page for your school and looked at your mission statement, you'll talk about all the wonderful things that you're doing. That's what your school is about, not this particular event. The second is that you're going to invent the future. What we're talking about here is you're going to put plans in place to make sure whatever this bad thing was can't happen again. And it shows you the direction that the school is going to move. But the last is the most important. But today our hearts and our prayers reach out to the students, to the parents, to those that were directly involved, and what you're going to do to help them. By making these three statements, you've not made any comment about the event itself. You've turned the focus to the future of where you want to go and how you want to get there. This is significantly better than no comment. It was significantly better than talking about the specifics of the actual problem. Let the first responders deal with that. You will not. Now, you're not going to be able to manipulate the media in these types of events. And again, one of the things that has happened over the last 10 years is you have the ability to directly communicate with your students, with your parents, with your teachers. So speak directly to them and not through the media. You know how to reach them, carry this on. The media will not be your friend here. Today, the world of media is significantly different than the world I grew up in. The Walter Cronkites of the world are different. Today, the news is entertainment or reality journalism. Look at the two Wall Street journals on your screen right now. These are about the same story on the same day. They were printed at two different times. The little stars in a circle there give you an indication of that. But you'll notice in the first one, with the same picture as the one in the right, the headline was, Trump softens his tone. On the right, you see Trump talks tough on Wall. The journalists had the opportunity to shift the message based on what they were hearing. And so the ability to control that message becomes highly limited. The media will do what the media wants to do. You do not need to be speaking with the media in any crisis that occurs in your school. It's not the public's right to know. It's what you need to be talking about with your students, your parents, and your teachers, not the media. By the way, the media will find this very frustrating in the process. Now, when we think about this type of area, we want you to be focused on the short term, the midterm, and the long term, and thinking about what's the significance of this crisis and what does it mean to my school. And so it shifts from being just a crisis decision or crisis management to becoming one of consequence management. What are the consequences of the actions that I take or the words that I'll see? Now, after the election, and the election certainly has dominated all of the things that we've been talking about today, and you've seen the Time has identified Donald Trump as the man of the year, but then there's a headline underneath it talking about the significance of that. But in that whole process, Kellogg became concerned about the Breitbart, and they felt that there was hate speech in that, so they decided they'd pull all their ads out of that publication and made a fairly large program on it. They had a particular set of strategies that they were hoping to do. Then from a consequence standpoint, they didn't fully analyze what are all the impacts that could occur on this. First, there was a program that was immediately developed, Dump Kelloggs, and signed a petition to boycott them as a result of their pulling the ads out of this. Well, why did that get any traction? Well, Kellogg's breakfast brand, Backlist Breitbart, declares hate for 45 million readers. Kellogg underestimated the impact of their decision to pull that, and their language about hate speech triggered a response negatively back. So now they have a significant brand impact as a result of what they were trying to do of getting out of the limelight, getting away from the problem. Their action triggered this particular response. And so that frames the problem nicely when you think about where we are in a crisis situation. So let's focus here on what we're missing. See that green slice of the pie there? That's what you know. Hey, you know a lot of things about what was going on, or what occurred, or what the circumstances are. There's some of what you don't know that you actually know. Maybe there was an injury. You don't know how severe it is yet, but you know that you don't have that piece of information. But the biggest portion of this pie, and the reason why crisis is so significant within your organization, is that you don't know what you don't know. And so you're going to be finding those impacts will be the ones that you're going to have to come back in and to be able to handle and prepare. That's why it's important to plan your messages in advance, to be prepared of what you would say. I had a group of schools in a workshop on how you stop a crisis this week, and as we were going through it, we talked about is it reasonable that you could have the death of a student? Unfortunately, we all said, yeah, that could happen. It could be a natural cause, it could be suicide, it could be an accident, it could be a violent act, it could be that. Well, do you already have planned your messages? And the answer was, no, we hadn't thought about doing that. It's easier to edit than it is to create, so you need to think about what your messages are in advance in each of those areas. So what do you know you don't know? Being surprised really will put you in a situation where you won't make the best decision. It'll be suboptimal. So that's why having this prepared in advance, by having intelligence, it will reduce the gaps that are out there. The statistics are pretty staggering today. If someone has ill intent, over 80% of the time somebody else knows. And over 67% of the time, two or more people know, and when they know, what do? They talk. Where are they talking? They're talking today on social media. But if you're making a statement, people are going to be reacting to it, and they're going to be reacting there. You need to have that information coming in. So you're not going to be putting messages out until you know the facts. You want to have people to understand what those messages are, what are the consequences if we say those, to get the best possible decision. Now, broadly, we've talked about already that if there was a crisis, we could have a loss of one of our facilities, we could have something that happens to our people, we could have something that happens to the information security or the information technology within our organization, or we could have something that would affect the brand or reputation of our school. There are 5 common failures that we find in disasters and crises. The first is the failure to control critical supply chains. There are supply chains at schools. There are people that you count on to be able to provide the food services or the other portions within your school. If people have access into your data systems, those could be sources of problems. Surveys across schools and businesses have found that 70 to 80% don't know what to do in a disaster or a crisis, and 95% don't have a plan at home, and family trumps job. So if your teachers don't have a plan at home and there's an area problem, then they're not going to come to school, and that creates another problem for you in that process. The third is failure to identify and monitor all threats and risks. And our schools have done a pretty good job in starting to identify a lot of the threats and risks. They've done a pretty bad job in monitoring to see if those are likely to happen and having predetermined triggers to activate the plans. So again, what we need to do is to say, here are the threats, risks, and vulnerabilities that we have. Here's what the impacts on our school would be if they occurred. Here's how we monitor to see if those are about to happen. Here's the triggers at which point we activate our plans. Here are the actions that we're going to take. Here are the communications that we're going to say. If you don't have those capabilities, you're going to find that you're going to find yourself in a situation where the outcomes won't be positive. And last is to have a crisis communications plan. Put those message maps in place for each one of the critical questions. Have someone trained as a spokesperson. By the way, we recommend that the initial spokesperson not be the head of school, because the parents will be thinking of the head of school helping to lead the response to the crisis, not trying to be out and talk at this point. Generally, we would bring the head of school out, but in the second or third day, not the very first day in the crisis. So having managed crises for the last number of years, we've developed a maturity model to see how you do in managing a crisis. And we look at the 5 different dimensions: your decision process, your roles and responsibilities, your information clarity, your speed of decision making, and your communications effectiveness. How you do in those 5 areas will greatly show whether you've had a successful outcome or not. Now, if you're a stage 1 company, that means that everything is coming as a surprise. It's really a liability to you at that point in time. And I'll say again, the last time a surprise was good, I was 5 and it was my birthday. If you find yourself in a crisis, there's going to be a significantly negative impact, and you're going to have to be prepared to deal with it. If you then have got some basic things in place, you're still in a reactive mode. Your performance will be much better because you've got at least some basic areas, but it's going to be suboptimal. If you're the third level, that you've taken steps in advance, it's supportive, you're going to see a much better outcome. Your crisis management performance will be at a higher maturity level. And finally, if it's a part of your culture, it's who you are. Your board understands their role in the crisis. Your leadership in the school understands theirs. The teachers theirs. The students theirs. The parents theirs. Now, our outcomes will be different. So if you ranked to the right in some of these categories, that's great. But if you've got one category over to the left, your whole performance in this crisis will be measured by that weakest link. That's where you need to put your focus in place and be ready to discuss and prepare for it. So there are a lot of things to think about. If you look at what has occurred, you're going to be tested this next year in your school. We've seen in Tennessee tornadoes. We've seen in Tennessee floods. We've seen in Tennessee fires. We've seen violence. There are opportunities out there for something to occur in the school year that you're going to have to help manage that response within it. So your plans are going to be tested. The real question is the one there: do you want to test them now, or do you want to wait until that actual event occurs? That's going to make a difference. You learn every time you exercise your plans. You learn what works, you learn what doesn't work, and how to do a better job. We've talked about in all of the webinars: predict, plan, perform. Predict what the vulnerabilities and threats are. What are the outcomes that you could have associated with that? What are the consequences that would be there? How do we monitor for them? What are the actions that we need to take? What are the words that we need to say? What is the point at which we activate our plans? What are all those plans spelled out, trained and tested? That's the perform portion. The majority of time in a crisis, everybody wants to jump to perform and skip the predict and skip the planning portion and strategies. That's the test for all of us. This is the area that we're in. You teach, you train, you educate, you support the values of your students. Now is the time for you to do it in this particular area. There is a brief from today's webinar. You can go to firestorm.com/briefs and download it there. You can also go directly to the website under resources, open it up, and you'll see that opportunity to get it. By the way, on that website, you will also have a chance to listen to this webinar again or share it with others in your school, or to go back to previous webinars. So there isn't a resource library there that's available to you. Our thanks go out to the Tennessee Association of Independent Schools and all that they do to help improve the quality and the support that our schools have. You play a vital role in your school. The networking and educational opportunities from the association are tremendous. Rich, do you want to add any general comments at the end of our webinar today?
No, well, I do want to say a couple things. Thanks, Jim, for reviewing 2016 and promising that 2017 will be even worse. We have to be prepared for that anyway, and that's very clear. So we appreciate all that you're doing to help us think about what our schools need to be doing. I will mention for TAIS, upcoming in January, we've got workshops. In January and February, Transforming Learning with Apple on the 19th of January. 25th of January, Curriculum Unit Design using the Understanding by Design model. That'll be in Memphis. Another one in Memphis on the 14th of February, Leading from the Middle. This will be for new or soon-to-be appointed division heads. And then Firestorm will be with us on February 23rd doing a behavioral risk and threat assessment workshop in Nashville, and we look forward to that and to continue to work with Firestorm. Back to you, Jim.
Thanks, Rich. We appreciate it. And the annual meeting, for those that really missed an opportunity, you should put that on your agenda in future years as those are scheduled to be a part of it. We know there are challenges that are out there. If you've got questions, you can go to firestorm.com, our website, and have access. If you've got a specific question, you can send us an email at webinars@firestorm.com, or you can call us at 800-321-2219. We're available to you 24/7 to help in those areas. Which I hope hadn't forecasted it's going to be worse in 2017 than 16, but I do think that crises and disasters are not going to stop. I think that's the world that we live in today. I think violence is playing an expanded role, and every time you turn on the television or look at a newspaper or listen to the radio, watch something on the internet, you're seeing that we're in a climate where the threats are growing, not declining. There's an Irish blessing or an Irish curse. I'm not sure which one is the more appropriate to call it. And it says, may you live in interesting times. And these are interesting times. There are new challenges that our students face every single day. There are new challenges that our teachers face, that our staffs face. We need to be prepared. If you don't have a plan, if the plan hasn't been trained, if the plan hasn't been tested, it will have an outcome that you didn't intend. Because we will tell you that in that first hour, that's the most critical time. The decisions that you make, the actions that you take, and the words that you say will determine whether this crisis is stabilized or increases rapidly and becomes much worse. Thank you for what you're doing for all of our students. We appreciate it greatly. I look forward to working with you in the coming year. Happy New Year, happy holidays, Merry Christmas to everyone. Thank you all. Good day.